I honestly believed my marriage was stable, not perfect, but steady in the way you rely on without thinking. We had been together long enough that I stopped questioning things. I trusted the rhythm of our life. My wife had recently switched jobs, moving from teaching younger kids to working at a high school across town. She framed it as a fresh start. New environment, new challenges. I supported her completely. I knew education wasn't easy, and I admired her commitment. That's why I didn't question the late nights at first. She started coming home well after dinner, sometimes close to midnight. She said the workload was heavier, that high school students were more demanding, that paperwork never ended. I believed her. I adjusted my schedule, ate alone, went to bed alone. The next thing that changed was her phone. It was always buzzing, constant notifications, mostly in the evenings. When I asked who it was, she casually mentioned a student who needed guidance. She spoke about him a lot, how intelligent he was, how mature for his age, how much potential he had. She said she felt responsible for keeping him on the right path. Something about the way she said his name stuck with me, but I pushed the thought away. I didn't want to be suspicious. I didn't want to be that guy. One morning, I decided to surprise her. She'd been stressed lately, so I grabbed coffee and drove home before heading to work. I unlocked the door and immediately felt like I'd walked into the wrong house. There was a young man standing in our hallway. He wasn't wearing a jacket. He wasn't holding books. He looked panicked, like he'd been caught somewhere he had no business being. When he saw me, his face drained of color. My wife appeared seconds later, forcing a laugh. She told me he was a student helping her prepare materials for school. She acted annoyed that I'd shown up unannounced, like I'd interrupted something normal. Nothing about it felt normal. I didn't argue. I handed her the coffee, said goodbye, and left. The entire drive to work, my chest felt tight. I kept replaying the look on his face. That evening, I came home late. The lights were off. The house felt off. When I went into our bedroom, the bed was a mess. Not slept in, not made, just disturbed. There was a smell in the room I didn't recognize. The shower was running. I walked into the bathroom, expecting to see my wife alone. Instead, through the steam, I saw a silhouette that didn't belong there. A young body. Too young. Standing still, like he didn't know whether to hide or run. I didn't confront them. I didn't even speak. I turned around and walked out of my own house. I sat in my car for nearly an hour before I could drive. I ended up at my parents' place, numb and silent. I told them I needed space. I didn't explain more than that. Later that day, I contacted the school district. I reported exactly what I'd seen. I thought they would act immediately. They didn't. They dodged. They minimized. They asked questions that sounded more like excuses. It became clear very quickly that they wanted the problem to disappear. My wife started texting me that night. Long messages. Apologies mixed with blame. She said it was complicated. She said I didn't understand. She said she was scared of losing everything. I didn't respond, because in that moment, I realized my marriage hadn't fallen apart that day. It had been rotting for a long time. I just hadn't noticed yet. I stayed at my parents' house longer than I expected. At first, I told myself it was just for a few nights, just until my head stopped spinning. But every morning I woke up there, the reality sank in a little deeper. I wasn't taking a break. I was homeless in my own marriage. My wife kept texting, then calling, then leaving voicemails that swung wildly between sobbing apologies and sharp accusations. One minute she was begging me to come home, saying she'd ruined everything. The next, she was furious, saying I had no right to report her, that I'd blown things out of proportion. I didn't answer any of it. I needed silence. I needed distance. Every word from her felt like poison. A few days later, I went back to the house while she was supposedly at work. I told myself I was just picking up clothes. That was the lie I used to unlock the door. The house felt unfamiliar, like it no longer belonged to me. I noticed things I'd ignored before. Her laptop on the kitchen table still open. A second phone charger in the bedroom that wasn't mine. A stack of printed papers with a student's name at the top. His name, written again and again in her handwriting, like she'd been practicing it. I didn't touch anything. I didn't need more proof. I already had enough. That evening, my parents finally pushed me to talk. I told them everything. Not just what I'd seen, but how long it had been going on. How blind I'd been. My mother cried. My father just stared at the floor, jaw clenched. They asked me what I was going to do. For the first time, I admitted the truth out loud. I'm done. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer. That's when things got worse. As soon as my wife realized I wasn't coming back, her tone changed completely. The apologies stopped. She told people I was unstable, that I'd been paranoid for months, that I'd imagined the whole thing. She even suggested to a mutual friend that I was having a breakdown and needed help. I couldn't believe how fast she turned me into the villain. Then the school district called. Not to apologize. Not to take responsibility. They warned me. They said I should be careful about what I was claiming. They reminded me that accusations could have consequences. It felt less like a conversation and more like a threat. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about damage control, about reputations, about burying the truth. I started writing everything down. Dates, times, messages I remembered, small details I'd ignored before, the late-night drives, the sudden secrecy, the way she'd defended him without hesitation. And the more I wrote, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a choice she'd been making over and over again. When I finally did respond to her, it was with one sentence. I'm filing for divorce. Her reply came instantly. You're ruining my life. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty. She showed up at my parents' house 2 days later. I wasn't expecting her, but part of me knew it was coming. She was never good at being ignored. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, I barely recognized her. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back messily, her face tight with anger she was trying to disguise as sadness. She didn't apologize. She accused me. She said I was overreacting. She said I had humiliated her. She said I had no idea how much pressure she was under and how lonely she had felt. She talked like she was the victim of circumstances, not the person who had shattered our marriage. When I didn't respond, she lost control. She started yelling, saying I had no proof, that nothing illegal had happened, that he was 18 and technically an adult. Hearing her say that out loud made my stomach turn. She said the school district agreed with her. She said I was destroying her career out of spite. My father stepped between us and told her to leave. As she walked away, she turned back and said something I will never forget. You'll regret this. The divorce process was uglier than I imagined. She fought everything. The house, the finances, even things I wasn't asking for. It felt like she was trying to punish me for daring to walk away. She dragged my name through the mud with anyone who would listen. Friends I'd known for years suddenly stopped answering my calls. Some of them believed her version, that I was jealous, unstable, controlling. I learned very quickly how lonely truth can be. Meanwhile, rumors started spreading around the school. Parents whispering, students talking. Someone had seen something. Someone had screenshots. The district couldn't ignore it forever. She was placed on temporary leave. She told people it was because of stress. She told people I'd forced her into it. Behind the scenes, investigators were involved. They contacted me, asked questions, wanted timelines, messages, anything I could remember. I gave them everything. She found out I was cooperating and exploded. She sent dozens of messages in one night. Threats, begging, blame. She said if I cared about her at all, I'd stop. She said I was ruining multiple lives, not just hers. She said I'd regret it when everyone knew what kind of man I really was. I blocked her number. A few weeks later, she was officially fired. The district issued a carefully worded statement. No admission of wrongdoing, no apology, just enough to make it go away. That's when the guilt hit her. She showed up again, this time crying, saying she'd lost everything, saying she needed me, saying she didn't know who she was anymore. She said she never meant for things to go that far. I listened, quietly, calmly. Then I told her it didn't matter. Because trust, once it's gone, doesn't come back just because someone finally feels sorry. The divorce was finalized months later. I kept my distance the entire time. Communication went through lawyers only. By then, the anger had cooled into something else. Clarity. I stopped blaming myself. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. I started rebuilding. Some nights, I still replay that moment in the bathroom. The steam. The silence. The instant my life split in two. But it doesn't control me anymore. What controls me now is something simpler. The knowledge that walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done, and the best decision I ever made. If you'd asked me years ago what betrayal looks like, I wouldn't have known how to answer. Now I do, and I know this much for sure. Some endings are actually beginnings. You just don't realize it until you survive them. Life didn't suddenly get better once the divorce papers were signed. That was something no one warned me about. There was no relief moment, no dramatic exhale where everything felt lighter. What I felt instead was empty. Like someone had taken a wrecking ball to my life and left me standing in the dust, expected to rebuild without a blueprint. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It was quiet. Too quiet at first. No slammed doors. No sudden mood swings. No constant tension. Just silence and the hum of a refrigerator that worked a little too loudly at night. At first I hated it. Then I started to realize how much peace sounds like nothing. I went back to work fully, threw myself into long hours. Not because I loved my job, but because it kept my mind occupied. Coworkers asked questions I didn't want to answer. I learned to smile and say things like, "It just didn't work out," even though the truth sat heavy in my chest. Occasionally, I'd hear updates about her through other people. She moved out of the house. She was staying with a friend. She was looking for work outside education. Every story felt distant, like it was about someone I used to know in another life. Then one afternoon, months after everything had supposedly settled, I got an email. Not from her. From a lawyer I didn't recognize. They wanted to talk. Apparently, the investigation hadn't ended when she was fired. It had only gone quiet. More students had come forward. Parents had started asking questions the district couldn't dodge anymore. What had once been brushed aside was now under a microscope. They asked me if I'd be willing to provide a formal statement. I didn't hesitate. Sitting in that office, retelling everything again, I felt strangely calm, detached, like I was narrating a story that no longer belonged to me. I stuck to facts, dates, observations, what I saw, what I heard, what I didn't assume. When I left, I felt lighter than I had in months. A few weeks later, I heard she was facing charges. Not because of me alone, but because the truth has a way of surfacing when enough people stop protecting it. The same institutions that once warned me to stay quiet were suddenly distancing themselves from her as fast as they could. She tried to contact me again. New number. Long message. She said she was scared. She said she never imagined it would end like this. She said she wished she could go back and fix things. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because I finally understood something. Closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from acceptance. I accepted that the woman I married wasn't the person I thought she was. I accepted that love doesn't excuse betrayal. I accepted that walking away didn't make me weak. It saved me. Slowly, I started letting people back into my life. Old friends, new routines, weekend walks, cooking meals just for myself. Small things that reminded me I was still here. One night, sitting alone with a drink I didn't even finish, it hit me how close I'd come to losing myself, trying to hold on to something rotten. I don't hate her. I don't miss her. I just don't recognize her anymore. And I'm finally okay with that. If anyone reading this is standing where I once stood, questioning their sanity, wondering if they're overreacting, telling themselves they just need more proof or more patience, listen to me. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And leaving doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you survived. Years passed, and the sharpness of everything slowly faded. Not because I forgot, but because I finally understood. The pain stopped being loud. It stopped demanding attention. It became something quieter, something settled, like a scar you only notice when you touch it. I no longer needed answers from her. I no longer replayed conversations, wondering what I should have said differently. There was nothing left to resolve. Some truths don't arrive through confession. They arrive through behavior. I realized that the most damaging part of that marriage wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how long I had lived disconnected from myself. How often I had silenced my instincts just to keep the peace. How I had convinced myself that discomfort was normal, that doubt was weakness, that loyalty meant endurance. It doesn't. Loyalty without honesty is self-destruction. I rebuilt my life slowly, intentionally. I chose people who were consistent, not charming, honest, not persuasive. I learned that trust isn't something you declare. It's something that forms naturally when words and actions align. There were moments when loneliness crept in. Moments when it would have been easier to return to something familiar, even if it was broken. But I stayed where I was. I stayed with the discomfort of growth instead of the comfort of denial. And that made all the difference. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. I simply don't carry her with me anymore. What she did belongs to her story, not mine. My story continued the moment I chose myself over a version of love that required silence. If I could speak to the man I was back then, I wouldn't warn him. I wouldn't rush him. I'd only tell him this: you are not weak for trusting. You are not wrong for wanting peace. But you are allowed to leave the moment your reality starts being denied. Walking away didn't break me. It gave me my life back. At some point, I stopped thinking about what could have been different. That question had kept me stuck for too long. What if I had noticed sooner? What if I had confronted her earlier? What if I had been more present? Those questions don't heal you. They trap you in a version of the past that no longer exists. The truth is simple, even if it's uncomfortable. I acted with the information I had at the time. I trusted someone I loved. That doesn't make me weak. It makes me human. What followed after I left was not dramatic. No sudden happiness, no instant relief. Just slow, quiet progress. Days where nothing hurt a little less. Nights where I slept without replaying conversations in my head. Mornings where my first thought wasn't dread. That's how healing actually looks. I learned to enjoy my own company, to sit in silence without feeling like something was missing, to make decisions without asking myself how someone else would react. Freedom didn't arrive loudly. It arrived gently. Occasionally, someone would ask if I ever thought about reaching out to her again, if I ever wondered how she was doing. I'd answer honestly, no. Not because I didn't care, but because caring no longer required my involvement. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut. They just need to stay closed. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because I know there are people reading who feel that same quiet unease I ignored for years. The feeling that something isn't right, even when everything looks fine from the outside. Listen to that feeling. You don't need proof that ruins your life to justify leaving. You don't need to catch someone in the worst possible moment. You don't need permission to protect yourself. If you're constantly explaining away discomfort, minimizing your own needs, or doubting your reality just to keep someone else comfortable, that's already your answer. Walking away saved me, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the foundation of any life worth living.